Good.
Anyone gets transplanted on the
Okay, welcome to another fun week. The Olivet Discourse.
We're the bad students. We're in the back. That's right, we're in the back.
It's 5 o'clock. We're going to get started. I'll pray us in, and then we'll go. Lord God, Heavenly Father, thank you for all that you do for us. Thank you for your word that we can study and learn from it, Lord. And it is amazing how, no matter how many years we've been a follower of Jesus Christ and reading the Bible, how we continue to learn and find more and more things in your word. So please bless us, guide us as we endeavor to learn more tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so thank you all for coming. We're live on Facebook. Anybody that's on Facebook that's watching, please send me a note so I can find out who's lurking in the sidelines there. This is a reminder that no class the next 2 weeks. Right? You got Christmas Eve next week, New Year's Eve, and probably a few of you will be out hooting and hollering that night. Right? And then the next time we meet is going to be Thursday, January 8th at 5 p.m. We're leaving Wednesday nights and we're going to Thursday nights. That's what you all wanted to do. Okay?
Still in here.
In here. Same place. Same bat channel. Okay? So last week we began studying the time of Jacob's trouble. And it's based upon this unique verse in Luke 21:22 that is not found in the Matthewan or the Markian version, because these are days of punishment, or some Bibles say vengeance, so that all things which have been written will be fulfilled. And so now tonight I wanted to ask you to open to Daniel 12. We're going to be spending some time there, and we'll be hopping around. We're going to be hitting Daniel a lot this week. Daniel 12 plus our Olivet Discourse text. So we're going to see how this statement from Luke fulfills prophecy. That's what we're going to do this week. So the time of Jacob's trouble is a time of purification of the Jews, in which 2/3 of them are killed by the Antichrist. We talked about that last week. We did some calculations, what the population of Jews were. But 1/3 of them will survive this refining. Revelation 7, 4-8 describes some of them that survive, which is the 144,000 Jews that are marked. They receive a seal.
Are you sure they're not the Jehovah's Witnesses, bro?
I'm positive.
Okay, good.
Okay, but I will tell you that when the Jehovah's Witnesses come to my house, I give them the gospel, and then I tell them, you know, I am one of the 144,000, and you are obligated to listen to me. And it makes their head spin.
And away they go.
They don't know what to do with it. It blows their mind. I can see the smoke coming out of their ears when I tell them that.
And you love it.
Yeah. During this same time, there is a simultaneous and in parallel, think of it in parallel, refining of the church and of faithful believers. So that's what we were studying in the Great Tribulation, and even in the beginning of Birth Pangs, we started to talk about this, how the church is going to go through a refinement and persecution, thlipsis, tribulation. That's why it's called the Great Tribulation, right? And that this happens simultaneously. So if you look at this drawing here, I drew this, it's still here. The Great Tribulation and the time of Jacob's trouble occur at the same time in parallel. All right? They're not two distinct times. That's the stumbling block for a lot of people. Revelation 6, 9-11 and Revelation 7, 9-16 describe those who maintain their faith until their death. Do you know those texts, or should we look them up?
I don't know.
All right, let somebody look up. Let me ask one volunteer, pick up Revelation 6, 9-11, and a second volunteer pick up Revelation 7, 9 to 16.
I have 7.
Okay.
To go now.
Dean, you got 6?
Okay.
All right. Whoever gets there first can read it.
After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne, before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. All the angels stood around the throne and the elders and before the creatures that fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, saying, Amen, blessing and glory and wisdom, thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen. One of the elders answered, saying to me, Who are those who wrought these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from? And I said to him, Sir, you know. And so he said to me, These are the ones who came out of the Great Tribulation and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb.
Right.
Therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. He who sits on the throne will dwell among them. They shall neither hunger anymore nor thirst anymore. Not strike or any.
Right. That's a clear description of believers, right? They got martyred during the Great Tribulation. Who has Revelation 6, 9 to 11? All right. Juanita, please.
When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. They called out in a loud voice, How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood? Then each of them was given a white robe. They were told to wait a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and brothers who were to be killed as they had been was completed.
Right. And then there's other texts in the book of Revelation. There's Revelation 24. There's Revelation 13, 7 to 11. There's several other places, but we're not going to chase all of them down. I think it's clearly established that believers in Jesus Christ, that's, the metaphoric language, they're clothed in white robes, washed in the blood of the Lamb. Cannot be anything other than believers, right? The time of Jacob's trouble, though, does not apply to the persecution of believers. It applies only to Jews. All right. And that's why I say this is something that occurs in parallel with the persecution of believers. The time of Jacob's trouble is based on Old Testament prophecy that was particularly pointed at the Jews. The time of Jacob's trouble does not apply to the persecution of believers, only to Jews, but occurs at the same time. Sorry for the repetition. During the Great Tribulation, the Antichrist will persecute all the people who represent God. And if you've been in my classes for any length of time, you've heard me say this many, many, many times. The Antichrist is going to persecute anybody who represents God. He is against God. And if you represent God, he's against you. All right? So why would he be against the Jews? Because they're God's chosen people, right? And why would he be against the Christians?
We're saved.
Because we're also God's chosen people, right? And so we have this thing in common. Now the Jews have a stumbling block that they don't come to Christ, right? But that is the only theocracy in the history of the world. God established a relationship with the Jews long ago, and he still has a relationship with the Jews. All right? But how did the Gentiles get brought into a relationship with God?
Well, when the Jews rejected it.
That's it. That's exactly it. When Jesus came, the gospel was brought to the Jews first. They rejected him because of the hardness of their hearts. And then the gospel was taken to the Gentiles. And Paul explains that the Gentiles are brought in order to make the Jews jealous. Okay? So that relationship still continues. All right? So, let's move on. That focus will be directed at believers and followers of Jesus Christ. That is the persecution of the Antichrist. So it's both simultaneously. But that persecution will also include Jews who were God's chosen people from the time of Abraham forward. Abraham is the father of faith, right? And I've been studying in Luke this week. I've been studying Luke 16, the rich man and Lazarus. And Lazarus goes to Abraham's bosom, place of comfort. The Antichrist will have contempt and hatred for both. Now, the time overlap of the time of Jacob's trouble and the Great Tribulation create the stumbling block for many Bible scholars, commentators, and eschatology students. So we're going to look at what some other commentators and scholars have to say about that. So I can show you. Although the time of Jacob's trouble is a term that is to be reserved for Jews, many commentators assume that the church is not present during this time, and therefore must have been raptured prior to the start of the time of Jacob's trouble. So now I'm talking about people with different eschatological views, right? We talked about this a lot in this class. But that is part of the stumbling block around understanding what the time of Jacob's trouble is. The Bible never says that, though. It's purely an assumption. They cannot see that the church and the Jews will be persecuted over the same 3.5-year period that Jesus calls the Great Tribulation. The second serious error made by theologians about the time of Jacob's trouble is how God's judgment is properly applied. And this is where it gets a little complicated. The time of Jacob's trouble is a time of God's judgment, but only on the Jews. Okay? Only on the Jews. This judgment is not the same as God's judgment that will be meted out during the day of the Lord. It's different. All right? Remember when in 586 BC, when Nebuchadnezzar came to Judea and conquered Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and took the Jews captives? What was that all about? Why did that happen? Does anybody know? That was an act of God's judgment. He used Nebuchadnezzar to do that to the Jews. Why did he do that? Because they wouldn't let the fields go fallow on the 7th year. Okay? And they did it for so many years. He says, you know what? You're going to be captive for all the years that you didn't do it. You're going to be captive. And we're going to destroy the temple. Okay? Not just are you going to be captive, the place of your central worship is going to be destroyed. The city of your holy city is going to be destroyed, which is the center, the nucleus, the centrum of Judaism. So it wasn't just capturing the people. That was real judgment on Israel. Okay? So the time of Jacob's trouble is similar to that. You could think of that in parallel as well. All right? But it's to the Jews only. Okay? He will use the Antichrist as his tool to execute his judgment on the Jews, just as he used Nebuchadnezzar to capture the Jews and take them. I'm sorry I get ahead of the slides. Nebuchadnezzar was unknowingly doing God's will in judgment against Israel for their lack of following the law and not allowing the ground to lay idle every 7th year. So, Daniel 12:11 provides another very specific indicator about the Great Tribulation and the time of Jacob's trouble. It uses the specific marker of from the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up. So let's take a look at Daniel 12:11. Is everybody there already? Daniel 12:11 is and from the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, there'll be 1,290 days. The mention of two items should be understood as being coincident with each other. Coincident meanings occurring at the same time. They both occur at the same time and are not to be misunderstood as two separate events. And we have correlating information about that. The time the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation, when you read what Paul wrote in 2 Thessalonians, he talks about the same things. That the Antichrist goes in to the temple of God and stops the regular sacrifice and sits down in the temple of God and commits the abomination of desolation. So those two coincident events provide what we call a terminus a quo, or a starting point. Have you ever heard that term before? Terminus a quo? It's a Latin term. Daniel 9:26 describes the destruction of Jerusalem and the second temple in 70 AD. Does everybody remember the prophecies of Daniel chapter 9? Is that a yes or a no?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, good. Somebody's on the ball back there. That's the prophecy of the 70 weeks of Daniel, right? But Daniel 9:27 is still clearly in the distant future. So the destruction of Jerusalem prescribed in Daniel 9:26, we've demonstrated this over and over in this class, did not occur in 70 AD. Even though there are people that are called preterists that just want to continue to believe it. Daniel 12:1-2 describes a time of distress such as never occurred. Daniel 12. Now at the time, Michael the great prince, who stands over the sons of your people, will arise, and here it is, and there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be rescued. So this is both specific to the Jews and dual prophecy at the same time. Because the words, and there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time, is not exclusive to the Jews. This is the same wording that Jesus was quoting when he was talking to the church about in Matthew 24:21 about the Great Tribulation. Matthew 24:21 becomes a correlating verse here and describes a great tribulation such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will again. So there's another reason why I am teaching that these things are occurring in overlapping time. The time of Jacob's trouble is a term that is derived from the King Jimmy version of Jeremiah 37, which describes a terrible time in the future of Israel. But in the end, it has a word of hope. It says, yet he will be saved from it. And it refers to a remnant of Jews who will be saved. So why do you think it's called the time of Jacob's trouble and not Abraham's trouble or Isaac's trouble? Why is it Jacob's trouble?
Because Jacob is Israel.
But why wouldn't Abraham be Israel? He's the father.
Wasn't Jacob renamed Israel?
Yes, he was. That's a good answer. Okay. So here's where I'm trying to go with this. I was trying to bait you all and see if you would go down this road. Abraham had two sons, right? Who were the two sons? Isaac and Ishmael. All right. So both of his sons, well, only one of them was in the lineage of promise, right? And then Isaac had two sons. Who were they? Jacob and Esau. And only one of them was in the lineage of promise. But Jacob had 12 sons, and they became the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay? That's how it follows. The rabbis have debated about the time of Jacob's trouble for hundreds of years. There are many opinions in the Mishnah and other rabbinic literature. Does anybody know what the Mishnah is?
Rabbinic literature.
It is. But it is where they took the oral traditions and the oral teachings of the rabbis and they put it in writing. So then they ended up with a book. That's what it is. Because you had the written law, and then you had the rabbis who were interpreting the law and adding other things to it verbally and handing these verbal things down with tradition. All right? So this really greatly expanded Judaism and obeying the law and all this other stuff. And boy, was that some bureaucracy. So that's what the Mishnah is. And by the way, the rabbis had various opinions about their religious documents, just like Christians today do about the Bible. Right? You have all these different opinions. Most rabbis agree, though, that the time of Jacob's trouble has a future eschatological meaning. So they come together on that. The verse is explicitly directed at Jacob, which is a metaphor for the term Israel, i.e. the Jews, because Jacob was the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. So let me ask somebody to turn to Jeremiah 30, verse 7, and read that for us.
Which says, alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble that he shall be saved out of.
Okay. Thank you. That was a quick response.
I was looking up Jacob's trouble.
Yeah.
He primed up
Yeah.
or something? Wow.
It scared Dean. Dean got the heebie-jeebies out of that one.
That might have a new favorite person.
Now, when I was researching this book, the Olivet Discourse, I found this guy, Art Katz, that I had never heard of before. Has anybody here ever heard of Art Katz? Okay. He's a Messianic Jew. All right. And he believed that the time of Jacob's trouble must occur specifically in Jerusalem and in Israel based on Isaiah 6, 11 to 13. Who can look that up?
He's good.
You guys are getting lazy. Isaiah 6, 11 to 13.
I got it. iPhone. Then I said, Lord, how long? And he answered, until the cities are laid waste and without inhabitant. The houses are without a man. The land is utterly desolate.
11 to 13.
The land is utterly desolate. The Lord has removed men far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. Yet a tenth will be in it, and will return and eat for consuming. Even a tree or as an oak, whose stuff remains and is cut down. So the holy seed shall be its stuff.
Okay. See, there's always a remnant. It's always a remnant. He's found many prophecies that refer to the rebuilding of Jerusalem, the desolate cities of Israel, and to the restoration of the nation of Israel. So he's a really interesting guy. I encourage you to look him up and listen to his stuff. Jeremiah 30:18 says, this is what the Lord says, behold, I will restore the fortunes of the tents of Jacob and have compassion on his dwellings, and the city will be rebuilt on its ruins, and the place will stand on its rightful place.
Palace.
Oh, palace, thank you. And the palace will stand on its rightful place. Look at that. Palace and place right on top of each other. Dyslexia. I had a moment of dyslexia. Katz has further determined that all of these prophecies refer to the eschaton and cannot be referring to present-day Israel. That's what's so interesting about his work. One detail that convinces Katz that it refers to the future is that the prophecy of Jeremiah 30 discusses how peaceful Israel will be. And what's interesting is This stuff has always been there, but I don't see many other people talking about this. He's kind of unique in his own lane here. And Jacob will return and be at peace without anxiety, and no one will make him afraid. Well, when is that?
When it's time.
When it's time. That's it. Is that today?
Would that be the millennium?
I think it's going to happen when Jesus Christ returns.
On the earth or something, right?
Yeah,
Otherwise, there's no peace.
that's right. That's exactly right. Okay? And remember, in Daniel 9:27, the Antichrist confirms a covenant with Israel. Many, many people over the years have interpreted that in a very specific way as to be a peace covenant with Israel. Okay? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't go that far. I think there's a good probability it could be a covenant to reinstate the Levitical sacrifices. Okay?
That's the peace.
Well, that lulls them into a sense of security that he's going to assure them that they can do this. And remember, we have to get a temple built, all right, in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah. So we don't know how that's going to happen. Somebody politically has to work that out. All right? And that temple is where these sacrifices are going to take place.
That's the kickoff.
That's the kickoff. I had an idea for another book last week. The coming temple. Write all about.
You're going to get writer's cramp, right? Stuff.
No, think about it. You know, there's a lot of stuff in the Bible about it, but there's also a lot of speculation. It's like circumstantial evidence that we talk about that leads us to the same conclusion, right? So the peace of Israel coincides with the prophecy of Daniel 9:27, where the Antichrist confirms a covenant with Israel. Though it's not specific enough to be dogmatic about it, the conjecture of the majority of commentators over the years that this covenant is related to the national peace of Israel. That's the most common opinion you'll read if you try to research what the covenant is in Daniel 9:27. It could be a confirmation of the Oslo Accords of 1993 or something similar, right? They tried that, but it failed. Many Bible commentators believe that the time of Jacob's trouble will occur starting at the middle of the 70th week of Daniel. It will be a time of unprecedented persecution of the Jews. It is terminated when the Messiah returns to free Israel from this intense persecution and to finally save her. So Jesus is going to save the remnant of Jews, 1/3, as well as the remnant of the church that exists during the Great Tribulation. However, the dispensational and pre-tribulational website got questions. Do you realize that is a biased website? A lot of people go there for different things. You've got to put your filter on when you go to that website. I go there a lot. There's a lot of useful stuff there, but you got to know when their bias is sticking out. All right. They clearly state their belief that the time of Jacob's trouble encompasses the full 70th week of Daniel, not just half. All right. So now we're going to show you how even people with the similar eschatological beliefs have differences of opinion. Here's what they say. The phrase, the time of Jacob's trouble, comes from Jeremiah 37, which says, "Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it." It is our view that the time of Jacob's trouble corresponds to the 7-year tribulation of the end times. Pretty plainly stated. They reinforce their belief with the following. Jeremiah 30 says, "That day is great, so that none is like it." The only time period that fits this description is the end times tribulation. the time is unparalleled in history. Okay? And that's because dispensationalists and pre-tribbers believe the whole 70th week of Daniel is essentially the same as the Great Tribulation. Okay? But they also believe that that is God's wrath. They believe that this is the day of the Lord. And they believe the bowl and the trumpet judgments in Revelation are all poured out during those 7-year period. All right? It creates some problems, though. Revelation 12 indicates that Israel will be persecuted by Satan and hiding in safety for 1,260 days, which is half of the 70th week of Daniel. So we've reviewed Revelation 12 several times here. But let me ask somebody to look up Rev 12, 13 to 14. Do you remember what Revelation 12 is about? No? You don't remember?
13 to 14.
Yeah.
And when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time and times and a half time from the presence of the serpent.
Right. So just to give you a quick overview, Revelation 12 is like a summary story of Israel in one chapter. Okay? Why do I say that? Because it opens up with a woman, some metaphorical language. A woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and her head had a crown of 12 stars. What's that sound like? Right? And she was with child, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. What's that sound like? It sounds like the birth of Jesus Christ. He comes out of Israel, right? Okay? And then verse 3, another sign in heaven, behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads, and his tail swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven, threw them to earth, and the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. Right? Satan opposing Jesus. And she gave birth to a son who is to rule all nations with a rod of iron. Her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Now here it is, verse 6. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared for God, so she might be nourished for 1,260 days. How long is that? It's exactly 3.5 years. And anytime you see words like that describes 3.5 years, it's always describing this second half of Daniel's 70th week. Always is. It can be said different ways. It can be said a time, times, and half a time. Okay? But it's always describing that. Now, Revelation 12 gets a little foggy.
Who are you saying the woman is here?
The woman is metaphorical language for Israel.
So why is Israel protected for those 3.5 years when she's supposed to be persecuted?
She is going to be persecuted, but the remnant gets protected.
Oh, you're saying that's the remnant?
Yeah, that's the remnant. Yeah. Jacob will be saved out of it. Okay? Look what happens in the rest of the chapter. The war in heaven. Michael fights the dragon. Michael is the protector of Israel. Okay? So when you see Michael mentioned, there's an association with Israel. Something with Israel is going on, right? In verse 9, the dragon was thrown down. I heard loud voice, and now salvation and power and kingdom and God and authority and Christ has come. For the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down. He accuses them before God day and night. Now, here's where it gets real foggy. Look what happens in verse 11. And they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb, because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even to death. Who's that sound like?
Not like Jews.
It's not Jews. That's believers. Okay? For this reason, rejoice, O heavens, for you who dwell on the earth. The devil has come down, having great wrath, knowing he only has a short time. All right? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
So you're saying that the Jews, that the remnant, get saved has nothing to do with the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony.
That's right. That's right.
How do they get saved? God just says, okay, you guys
They get saved when Messiah comes, because there's another prophecy that tells us that. Okay? There's a prophecy that says when they
don't have to believe in Jesus to be saved.
They do. They do. But here's what happens is, it's the only account that I can tell you in the Bible where somebody gets saved after Jesus comes. Okay? Everybody else is required to get saved ahead of time. Right? We generally think now is the time of salvation. You get saved now. You come to Christ now. After Jesus comes is the separation of the sheep and the goats. Okay? He gathers the church together, right? And all the people remaining on the earth are the unrepentant, unrighteous people that receive the wrath of God during the day of the Lord. However, there is a prophecy, forget where it is, I think it's in my notes, that says, when Jesus comes, the Jews will look upon him and mourn and then get saved. And they'll realize, oh yes, he's the one that we killed.
So they still have to come to believe that
Oh,
Jesus
they
is
do.
the Savior.
They do.
So it's the blood of the Lamb that does save them.
But that's the end of the time of Jacob's trouble. That's people that have endured the persecution and survived the persecution of the Antichrist. And it's 1/3. It's 1/3 of all the population of Jews. 2/3 get killed, 1/3 survives. Okay? I'm not making this up.
I know.
But Revelation 12 here gets muddy because it introduces Christians in here, okay? And now, let me just conclude it and we'll jump back into the notes. Look at verse 17. Verse 14. I can't skip it. and the wings of the verse 13, and he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the child. So he's persecuting the Jews. Right there in verse 13. Time of Jacob's trouble. In verse 14, and 2 wings of a great eagle were given to the woman in order she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she was nourished for a time, times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent. And the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so he might cause her to be swept away like a flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank the water, and the dragon poured out of his mouth. Now, look at verse 17. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went off to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and who hold to the testimony of Jesus. Okay? Now you know we're grafted in to Israel, right? Do you realize that?
Yes.
That's something we don't talk about a lot. It's a little factoid that we don't ignore it, but we just don't talk about it a lot. Okay? So Revelation 12 is a really, really interesting chapter. It starts out to being there's people that think Revelation 12 is all about the church. And that the birth that is described there is the birth of the church. I don't subscribe to that view. But there are people that claim that. Okay. Revelation 12 indicates that Israel will be persecuted by Satan and hiding in safety for 1260 days. That leads one to recognize that the Great Tribulation begins and occurs at the same time as the time of Jacob's trouble. Okay? These things are correlating. Therefore, the 2 periods of time are actually overlapped and even nearly synonymous, except that the time of Jacob's trouble refers exclusively to Jews. Therefore, we can view the time of Jacob's trouble as a subset or part of the Great Tribulation. Some theologians conclude that the persecution of Jews during that time must therefore be part of the day of the Lord. They correctly see the persecution of the Jews as God's wrath and judgment, as prophesied in Joel and Zechariah 13, 8-9, that 2/3 of all Jews will be killed, but 1/3 will be saved. Could somebody look up Zechariah 13, 8-9? We need this reference point here. Okay, you got it, Dean?
13, 8-9.
Go ahead, real loud.
Real loud. It will come about in all the land, declares the Lord, that 2 parts in it will be cut off and perish, but the 1/3 will be left in it. And I will bring the 1/3 part through the fire, refine them as silver is refined, and test them as gold is tested. They will call on my name, and I will answer them. I will say, they are my people, and they will say, the Lord is my God.
Right. Okay, so that's how we come to this statement about 2/3 of Israel will be destroyed. However, this leads them to subsequently conclude that the entire 70th week of Daniel is God's wrath, instead of the thlipsis that is actually described in the Olivet Discourse. And this is where we have different conclusions about it. Okay? They think this whole thing is the wrath of God. And I always teach that the first thing you should study in eschatology is know the difference between God's wrath and thlipsis, orge and thlipsis. And if you know the difference between them, you'll be on the right path to getting your theology right. They fail to understand the difference between thlipsis and orge. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, who was a Messianic Jew, he writes the following: while it is true that all will suffer during that time, Israel will suffer more so. The basic reason for this lies in Israel's relationship to God as God's firstborn. And therefore, Israel receives double both in blessing and in cursing. The principle that Israel receives double for all her sins is stated in Isaiah 40, 1-2. It's also found in Jeremiah 16, 16-18. The principle of Israel's receiving double for all her sins is the reason why the tribulation is uniquely the time of Jacob's trouble. So Fruchtenbaum believes that the whole 70th week of Daniel, that they use the word the tribulation, is the time of Jacob's trouble. The last line of Fruchtenbaum's statement is, the tribulation is uniquely the time of Jacob's trouble. In his many publications, it is clear that Fruchtenbaum believes that the church is not present during the Great Tribulation, and therefore all of the Olivet Discourse warnings apply only to the Jews. The time of Jacob's trouble is one that is rarely discussed among evangelicals or even students of eschatology. Yet the scriptures are extremely clear describing what will take place, and we have historical patterns that provide types and shadows to substantiate which is prophesied. In Deuteronomy, God prophesied about how Israel would rebel against them. He said, for when I bring them into the land flowing with milk and honey, which I swore unto their fathers, and they eat and are satisfied and become prosperous, then they will turn to other gods and serve them and spurn me and break my covenant. Then it will come about, when many evils and troubles find them, that this song will testify before them as a witness, for it shall not be forgotten from the mouth of their descendants. For I know their inclination, which they are developing today, before I bring them into the land which I swore. In the passage, God also predicts how Israel will have many evils and troubles. He knows their hearts, and he says, I know their inclination that will continue into the future. The book of Daniel contains a passage that describes the second half of the 70th week of Daniel. It describes what it will be like during the time of Jacob's trouble and the Great Tribulation. The angel Gabriel tells Daniel the prophet about the time of Jacob's trouble as he describes it in a similar manner to that of Jeremiah. So I have it for you right here on the screen. It's what I just read. And now at that time, Michael, the great prince, who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise, and there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be rescued. The words "at that time" begins Daniel 12:1, which is a reflection of the same time frame as was previously in view of the end time in Daniel 11:40, and that which was first mentioned in Daniel 10:14 as the latter days. So I want to interject something here. Daniel's chapters 10, 11, and 12 are all one vision. Okay? And all the academic scholars that reviewed it agree on that. We got to remember that chapter divisions were not in the original text when they were written. All right? And Daniel 10, 11, and 12 should be studied all together as one single unit. It's a large unit, but that's how it should be studied because it's all one vision. So Daniel 12:1 speaks of a great time of distress, which is a reference to the second half of the 70th week of Daniel. It's exactly the same time of tremendous tribulation spoken of by Jesus in Matthew 24:21, where he said, "Such has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will." Scholars widely agree that this vision of Daniel 11:36 to 12:3 is about the Great Tribulation that occurs in the 70th week of Daniel. And what's interesting is in Daniel chapter 11, it starts out up to verse 35 describing Antiochus Epiphanes and all the things that he is going to do in the future. All of those things have been fulfilled. But then suddenly, without warning, in verse 36, it switches to futuristic discussion that at first blush still appears to be Antiochus Epiphanes, but none of it has been fulfilled yet. And so that is reference to the Antichrist. And these two are like doppelgangers. They're like twins. Okay? Clarence Larkin writes in his commentary in the book of Daniel that the Great Tribulation spoken of by Christ was not the terrible sufferings that befell the Jewish people at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD is clear. That was local and fell upon the Jews only, while the tribulation that Christ foretold is to come upon the whole world and is to be immediately followed by great physical changes and the return of the Son of Man in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Well stated. Daniel 12:1 continues from the previous passage in chapter 11 in chronological order and looks back on that passage to set the context. Now, Michael the angel is in view, and it describes him as the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people. Michael will arise, which gives the impression that he's been passively observing on the sidelines up until this point. We find Michael mentioned 3 times in Daniel 10:13, 21, and here in 12:1. Michael the archangel is the protector of the Jews of Israel. In Revelation 12:7, Michael is the commander of an army of angels who does battle with the dragon and his angels who wanted to devour the child of Israel, who would be Jesus Christ. Michael's duty appears to be to protect Israel from the desire of Satan, who would like to thwart the sovereignty of God and eliminate all the Jews. Do you see that? That would be the objective of Satan. If he could eliminate Jesus Christ or eliminate all the Jews, he'd be getting back at God. We know the great certainty that the emergence of Michael the archangel on behalf of the Jews occurs immediately at the midpoint of the 70th week of Daniel by the similarity of Daniel 12:1 and other scriptures. They correlate. You learn from one, you see how they're connected to the other, you pick up little bits and pieces of information that might be included in the one and not in the other. Daniel 12:1 refers to it as, and there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. Jesus spoke of it in Matthew 24:21 and Mark 13:19 in remarkably similar manner, and most likely recalling these words of Daniel. So he wasn't directly quoting it, but he was definitely paraphrasing it. Matthew 24:21, Jesus said, "For then there will be great tribulation such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will." And his warning about the Great Tribulation follows chronologically after his warning in Matthew 24:15 about the abomination of desolation. So if you lay the Olivet Discourse alongside what we read in Daniel, you see a lot of correlating things that line up. And then you can do the same thing in the book of Revelation. In doing so, he referred all the readers to the book of Daniel. That's why. It is a chronological passage, as is the rest of the Olivet Discourse. The Great Tribulation and the time of Jacob's trouble are the final culmination of the time of indignation spoken of in Daniel 11:36. Now the he here, he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. Who's the he here?
The Antichrist.
That's the Antichrist. That's where it switches. Before that, it was Antiochus Epiphanes. It's the Antichrist. So, what is indignation? It's not a word we use very often, right? So I just popped it into Google this morning.
I was just going to read what you have.
Oh, okay. Indignation, you could have read it on your phone. You would have got the same thing. Indignation is a strong feeling of anger, shock, or annoyance provoked by something perceived as unfair, unjust, insulting, or wrong, often described as righteous anger. I like that right there. Think of indignation as righteous anger because it stems from a sense of moral outrage rather than personal offense. It's a reaction to perceived injustice, such as mistreatment, unfair conditions, or offensive behavior, and can involve feelings of resentment and disgust, driving a desire for correction or justice. So that's what indignation is. And that's what Daniel 11:36 was referring to. The return of Christ will terminate the indignation and extreme persecution of the Jews during the time of Jacob's trouble. At the same time, it will be the destruction of the Antichrist specified by Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2:8, where he wrote, "The Lord will slay with the breath of his mouth and bring to an end by the appearance of his coming." There is no equal match between Satan and Christ or the Antichrist and Christ. My friend Hayden Kent used to say, if Satan or the Antichrist was a little fly going by, Jesus could go and he'd be done. The time of Jacob's trouble has been expressed in many ways throughout the Old Testament. It is known for its prophecy of extreme persecution of the Jews by the Antichrist, out of which they will be rescued by the return of Jesus Christ. Upon his return, they will finally recognize Christ as the Messiah. So let's look up Zechariah 12:10 and 13:9. This is what I was referring to earlier. We got 5 more minutes. Who has Zechariah 12:10? Zechariah.
Zechariah 12.
Go ahead, Keith. You have a good loud voice.
Okay. Oh, I have it.
I have it.
Okay. Juanita has it.
And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son.
See? When Christ comes, that's what occurs. That prophecy will be fulfilled when Christ comes in the Jews. How about 13:9? Zechariah 13:9.
This third I will bring into the fire. I will refine them like silver and test them like gold. They will call on my name and I will answer them. I will say, they are my people, and they will say, the Lord is our God.
Okay. Really interesting verse. But notice that they are going to be refined through the fire. Then they will call on him. Many Jews will realize how wrong they were about not recognizing Yeshua HaMashiach. That is Jesus the Messiah. That's a way that Jews refer to Jesus the Messiah, the anointed one. That's what the word Christ means, right? It's not his last name. It means the anointed one. Deuteronomy 4:30 has, when you are in distress and all these things have come upon you, in the latter days, you will return to the Lord your God and listen to his voice. The rescue of the Jews is expressed by Jeremiah 30 with the phrase, but he will be saved from it. And I'll make this the last slide. The prophet, I got to go one more. The prophet Zechariah wrote about their refining and return to the Lord in 13:9. I'm sorry for repeating. And I will bring the third part through the fire, refine them as silver is refined, and test them as gold is tested. They will call upon my name, and I will answer them, and I will say, they are my people, and they will say, the Lord is my God. All right, so I'm going to conclude it there. We're out of time. Any questions or rebukes? Any questions or rebukes? All right. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you in 2 weeks. January 8th, Thursday.